A very warm welcome to all our seniors, colleagues, friends, students from the PCOS Society of India. Today we have planned a panel discussion on the subject of PCOS and pregnancy, and I'm very delighted to present to you luminaries from the various different fields here for this panel discussion. Let me introduce this wonderful panel to all of you, and I will start with sharing my screen. So, PCOS Society presents this panel discussion on PCOS and pregnancy. I myself am Dr. Sangeeta Agrawal, and my panelists are as follows. Uh, I am one of the founder members of the PCOS Society, and I am affiliated to Bhatia and Breach Candy Hospital. Uh, Dr. Uday Thanawala, he is a consultant obstetrician and gynecologist practicing in Navi Mumbai. He's a chairman elect for the Indian College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, vice president of FOXI, treasurer of the PCOS Society of India, and chairperson of the Medical Disorders of Pregnancy Committee of FOXI in 2006-2008, joint secretary of FOXI in 2005. He has received the
It's okay.
Yeah, he has a special interest in the area of ultrasonography, maternal medicine, fetal medicine, and high risk pregnancy. Dr. Chandar Lulla, a very well known person in entire Mumbai, and not only Mumbai, in India and abroad. He is a consultant sonologist and fetal medicine specialist attached to Jaslok Hospital and Reliance HN Hospital in Mumbai. He has his own clinic, which is popularly known as RIA Clinic, and he has received various awards and achievements in his roles as a president of IUFMB, as a ex-counselor as of AFSUMB. He's the editor or ex-editor of IFUMB Journal, and currently he's the dean of IFUMB. He has various publications and presentations to his credit. We are very happy to have Dr. Varsha Birla, who's a clinical biochemist associated with Metropolis Healthcare Laboratory. She has done her hands-on training in molecular techniques in practice and has clinical laboratory experience for over 6 years. She has also was in the past associated with Thyrocare. Dr. Jugal Gada, he's a consultant endocrinologist practicing in South Mumbai, and he is affiliated as assistant professor in endocrinology at Nair Hospital. He's a consultant at Bhatia Breach Candy ACI Kambala and Hormone Enco Clinic. He has been the principal and co-investigator in national and international clinical trials, and has been involved in phenotyping and genotyping, growth hormone deficiency in India, and continuous glucose monitoring technology related research. His special interest is in growth disorders, obesity, and metabolic disorders. He is the recipient of A.V. Gandhi Award for Best Clinical Thesis in 2018. So, we have a very good luminaries on this panel, and we will go through the subject of PCOS and pregnancy, and we will have the next program on 9th of January, which is at 4 p.m. That is a workshop on tackling the pregnant PCOS, but that will be an entire workshop covering various aspects of the pregnant patient. Today is going to be only a panel discussion on certain aspects of it. So okay. So, welcome everybody. For the panel discussion, the plan is that we have Preeti. Let me introduce our patient, her name is Preeti. She is 32-year-old, has been married for 5 years, was a known case of PCOS, and she had some difficulty in conceiving, but she underwent IVF and has finally conceived with embryo transfer. The IVF specialist has confirmed that she is now 8 weeks pregnant. She has a single intrauterine live pregnancy, and she has now referred this patient to this panel for complete management. through the pregnancy, to be well looked after. She is already taking folic acid, Ecosprin, metformin, and progesterone as suppositories. So let me start with Dr. Thanawala. So, Dr. Thanawala, this patient now comes to you, and how will you take it ahead from this first consultation? What investigations, what treatment would you advise, what would you stop, etc.? Everything I would like you to cover in the first consultation.
Yeah, so in the first consultation, whatever the IVF clinic starts, generally we continue all that because we don't want to interfere with their treatment until the patient reaches at least 12 weeks of pregnancy. Now, in this case, she is a PCOS patient, so in investigations, the fresh investigations which we will ask for is definitely a hemoglobin, and I'm sure the blood group and the infection screen has been done. But if not done, infection screen, hemoglobin, blood group, and we generally would advise a 75-gram glucose challenge test if her sugar status is not known or is it doubtful. Most of the PCO patients are prone to a little bit of abnormal sugars. So we have to be careful that this woman is not already a frank diabetic. So generally, one can do a 75-gram glucose challenge test even in the first visit when they come. Unless you have a written record of HbA1c done a couple of days back, it would probably do. But generally, we would do a 75-gram glucose challenge test in this case for the sugar. We also would do a hemoglobinopathies to see if there is any thalassemia trait, etc. The routine things which we do.
Yes.
But at 8 weeks, generally, we would continue all the medicines and counsel the woman that in general, a PCO becoming pregnant has a slightly increased risk of spontaneous abortion, but it is not all that very high. If she is careful and if she takes all her medicines carefully, there should not be a problem. If at 8 weeks we've seen heartbeats and all, the next scan would be at 12 weeks. And the counseling for the 12-week scan is a little different because
so we'll come to that in a bit. Can I hold there and now ask what will you do? Will you continue her metformin?
Well, yes, I would continue her metformin
Okay.
in general, even though there is no definite evidence that it helps. In fact, the Indian FDA has not approved metformin in the first 3 months. But in general, if a woman is on metformin and a PCO patient, it has been shown that it benefits them to continue for the first 3 months.
Okay. So, Dr. Gada, I would like your view on this, your comment. A, would you advise us to continue the metformin? Two, considering that she's already on metformin, should we do a fasting blood sugar? Should we do a post-glucose challenge test, or it is not required now? Having it surely was done before she got pregnant, and now she's already on metformin. So, your views on that?
So I would definitely do the 75-gram OGTT, but we would do a 0 and a 2 hour, not the 1 hour, because it's only for the 24 to 28 weeks when we need all the three. And we use the normal cutoff for diabetes as we use for the non-pregnant individuals, that is a fasting of more than 126 and a PP of more than 200. As Dr. Uday sir already pointed out, you need to not miss out an overt diabetes. That is the reason why you need to do it.
Okay.
Coming to metformin part of it, so very nicely pointed out that definitely the guideline recommends that you should be stopping in the first trimester. However, if we look at all the evidence that is there, especially the recent pregnant study, what they have suggested is you may not, slow down the progression to GDM, but however, late trimester abortions and preterm labor is definitely decreasing. So I would definitely continue metformin in this patient, but yeah, not with the preempt that it's going to prevent a GDM or the sugars are going to become better, but maybe because of these two points out here.
Yes, Dr. Thanawala.
Yeah, I would, Jugal, what we are doing in practice, especially what the recommendations of the government of India say and Foxy says that there's no need to do a fasting sugar now because it is very difficult for pregnant women to come fasting. That is number one. In our practice, in the town practice, yes, it is very easy, but in all other places or the periphery or in the villages, it's very difficult for a patient to come fasting. So we do what Dipsy recommends.
I completely agree to that, sir. So I feel if you are in a setup where a proper OGTT is possible with a fasting and 2 hour of fasting, 1-2 hours in the 24 to 28 weeks, I think that is the ideal. But yeah, in centers where it is not possible or you are in a peripheral place, then I think the DIPSI criteria makes sense. Having said that, once we've done the DIPSI and we've got a positive test, I think it still makes sense to confirm it on a fasting and recall the patient. It definitely will benefit so that we don't unnecessarily, misdiagnose or wrongly diagnose GD.
On the contrary, Jugal, what the view is that a DIPSI test, irrespective of fasting, if you are giving a glucose load and the reading doesn't come down to below 140, means if she is a diabetic, it will go definitely above 140, so you're not going to miss it. But plus, there is a little bit of a doubt of false positives, not false negatives. So in generally, when you get a DIPSI test positive of more than 140, we are now labeling it as a diabetic or a GDM. We are not confirming with the OGTT, because if this patient, if you give a glucose dose again and do it again, the sugars may again rise very highly. So when we get any reading above 140, we are just labeling that patient as a GDM and treating accordingly to whatever the levels come. That is the Government of India guidelines today generally. But I agree with you, in practice where it is possible and if somebody wants to do a OGTT, do it. But let me tell you, even in my private practice where we get very good class patients, it is very tedious for the patient to give glucose, give blood fasting, then drink the glucose and wait in the laboratory for 2 hours and give the blood. It's a very cumbersome technique of OGTT, and especially in COVID times, nobody wants to do that. Sit in a lab for 2 hours and give blood and all that. So, in technically, the DIPSI test, especially in this COVID times, is proved very, very useful. Where we are telling the patient, here's your packet of 75 grams glucose packet, which we give to the patient on the prior visit, and we say, okay, you drink this in half a glass of water. Don't don't be very, very active after you drink it. Be a little sedentary after you drink it, and exactly after 2 hours, just give one sample of blood. So it suits them so very well, and the pickup rate is as good. It has been compared by many studies by DIPSI and the other thing. The pickup rate by this and the IAGTP, the thing is extremely comparable. So I think
So if someone comes negative when you know that, I mean, like this patient PCOD who's probably a little obese, and if she does not classify as GDM as per the DIPSI criteria, would you still not want to do a proper 75 gram OGTT?
no, if we just don't do the
no. Yeah, why would you do them? So
because I mean, as sir just pointed out, there is one study by Dr. V. Mohan which suggests that if they've compared the DIPSI and the ID-PSG criteria, so the DIPSI was missing almost 70% of the cases.
No, so, I don't think so. In fact, the study which I am saying is where Dr. Sheshaiah has compared it with this, and there was hardly a difference. I don't really remember the percentage.
Having said that, let us ask Dr. Birla. Well, what is your view on this, since you are from the pathology world? What is your view? Should we if the DIPSI says the patient is not diabetic, is having high sugar, should we treat her as diabetic or go ahead and do an OGTT?
As per the laboratory side is concerned, the oral glucose challenge test can be given at the first go if you are suspecting, especially a case of PCOS, where we suspect the patient will be converted to GDM. So we can go give a glucose challenge test first, wherein the patient will not be fasting when the first sample is given. However, a 50 gram of glucose challenge test can be given, and then again a sample can be collected after an hour. And if the values are above anything like 130, 135 and 140, then a glucose tolerance test can be done.
Yeah,
what Varsha is saying is a two-step test, which was by the MSc Association.
Yeah, but the question
world over, the two-step has been more or less given up, and people have taken to the IADGP test, where it is a fasting 1 hour and a 2-hour reading, right, Dr. Gada?
One-step approach.
I think the values are 182 and 1. Or for the IADGP, it is
92, 180, and 153. Yeah.
150. But what we are following now in India, and what the Government of India recommendations say, that in a pregnant woman, you do not need fasting. You can, irrespective of the fasting state, you can give the patient a 75 gram of glucose, and after 2 hours, take a single sample, and if it is more than 140, label her as a GDM. That is what the Government of India guidelines say, and we are generally following that to keep a uniformity.
Okay, so now let us assume that this girl has done all the investigations Dr. Thanawala advised. She has come back, all the reports were okay as expected, and her sugar levels were just about 140, 145. Let's put it 145. So then she follows back at 11 weeks. She's doing very well. Now at 11 weeks, what advice will you be giving her to Dr. Thanawala? What investigations would you recommend to
You
her?
have to tell me whether the sugar is 140 or 145. Now, let me tell you, if the sugar is between 130 and 140, we tell her that, look, be cautious. You may turn into a diabetic later on. So, avoid all sweets, avoid all too much of sugar, etc. And have a regular exercise pattern. There's no need for this patient, even if she's conceived with IVF, to just take bed rest, because that makes matters worse. But in general, if the sugar is 145, we label her as a GDM. We don't need not start any medication, but she has to do exercise and diet control. I'd refer her to a dietitian and tell her sugars to be absolutely proper. And I'll do an HbA1c to realize whether the sugar has been actually very high. Because if HbA1c is more than 6.2 or 6.5, then she also has a risk of having a congenital malformation goes higher as the HbA1c increases. So then, of course, when I send the patient to Chandar, I'm going to tell him that, look, this patient has an abnormal sugar, so please scan the baby properly. And the 11 to 14 week scan is a very important scan for this woman, because firstly, we want the structure of the baby. We also want the Doppler studies, which I think Chandar will elaborate better.
Yes. So at 11 weeks, she has met you, and you have given her the dietary advice, exercise advice. You've prescribed her the iron, calcium, and now you've advised her a set of blood tests and a set of sonography to be done. So
Yeah,
let's first go to doctor.
That test will be done after the scan in general, because we need the NT value.
Yes.
When we ask her to, the blood test which we are talking about is the screening for Down syndrome, and now what they call as the extended screening for PIH also, which can be done. But for that, we will need first the sonography report.
Yes. So now, Dr. Lulla, this patient has come to you from Dr. Thanawala for the sonography. What is the best time to do the NT? What will you look at in the sonography besides the routine things, keeping in mind that there is an increased risk of gestational diabetes and PIH?
Okay, yeah. So first of all, we do NT scan between 45 and 84 millimeters CRL. That is roughly between 11 plus 3 to 14 weeks. So that is very, very important criteria. And we will do the NT, as he said, and we will do the combined screening with PAPE and FreeVita HCG. And we will get the results in about 1 day. And that will give us a risk estimation of aneuploidy, which is with a 90% accuracy and a 5% false positive. Only thing I must point out that since it's a PCOS forum and the false positive is slightly higher in PCOS patients, they're roughly about 5 to 9%. So here we must add other markers on the ultrasound to reduce our false positives. And the very easy markers to add are the nasal bone and the ductus venosus and the tricuspid valve, because you can cover the heart with the ductus and the tricuspid valve Doppler and the nasal bone also. So if you're good at doing all these, then your false positive will reduce and come down to 5%, which is what is most desirable. So a combined screen is the best test to do.
Okay, great. Dr. Birla, your comments on this now. What are the tests to be covered from the laboratory end? And what is the role of the quadruple test? What is the role of NIPT?
As the patient is around 11 to 13 weeks of gestation and NT scan is already performed, I would recommend, and the risk of PIH is high in this case, I would recommend a dual marker plus preeclampsia screening, wherein apart from the NT-CRL and the nasal bone status, in the sonography, if you are able to get the PI values of both the left and right uterine arteries, the mean arterial blood pressure of the patient, the height and weight of the patient, these factors are added, taken into account, and a combined screening wherein dual plus preeclampsia can be screened out. In this, we are using FreeVita HCG, PAPE, PLGF, and NT values as the primary markers for the statistical calculation of trisomy aneuploidy screening as well as for the preeclampsia. So in this, we can screen out trisomies as well as early and late onset preeclampsia.
So it's also done in the first
First
at 11 to
trimester.
13 weeks.
Yes, 11 to 13 weeks of gestation.
Okay, so when we give a prescription, we what do we write? Combined screening with NT and PIH screening?
It is preeclampsia. It is preeclampsia
screening.
We write preeclampsia screening
with dual marker.
Actually, we always do the uterine artery Dopplers with the combined screening, and you can just add a PLGF for preeclampsia screening.
Yes. So dual marker with preeclampsia screen, that is the code that can be used.
That can be used.
And for this patient, Sangeeta, we need to mention that she is a diabetic, because that changes the value of the dual marker. They have to add a correction factor.
Yes.
That will tell us better.
Even in PCOS, in PCOS patients, I must tell you that they are at high risk, as you know, for preeclampsia. So uterine artery Doppler is very, very important with PLGF if possible. But if PLGF is not possible, then at least uterine artery Doppler, because the accuracy will be at least 80 to 90% with uterine artery Doppler alone. But if you can add the mean arterial pressure and the PLGF, of course, you have a 90% detection rate with the 10% false positive.
So the dual marker will include PAP-A and beta-HCG.
PAP-A, beta-HCG, PLGF, these three biochemical markers. And from the sonography, we'll have the CRL, NT, nasal bone, uterine artery Doppler studies. That is
mean
the
arterial
PI,
pressure,
mean arterial pressure, height and weight of the patient, as well as the previous history is very important in this case, whether there was any loss of pregnancy because of preeclampsia in the previous pregnancies. So the past history is also very important.
And as Uday said, if it's an IVF pregnancy, you need a correction factor. So maybe Varsha can highlight, because there's a lot of confusion about the effect of IVF on the dual marker. I'm not sure. A lot of gynecologists are very hesitant to do the dual markers in IVF situations. So can you please elaborate on that?
Yes.
So in IVF cases, what changes is the embryo transfer date. So embryo transfer date also, we have got a correction in our software, in the FMF certified software.
I'm talking about the biochemistry. This correction that we always do, but the biochemistry, does it get affected? To my knowledge, it does not, but there's a lot of confusion about that. So
biochemical moms will not be affected. However, the risk assessment have an effect, the IVF status and embryo transfer date have an effect on the risk assessment. The moms will not be, biochemical values will not be affected.
Biochemical values will not be affected.
No.
Okay, now in this, what is the role of NIPT and what is the role of that quadruple test for this particular patient?
So the quadruple test is primarily done in second trimester of pregnancy. So right from like 14 weeks to 22.6 weeks, the quadruple test can be performed, and the ideal time is 15 to 17 weeks of gestation. However, if the patient has already undergone dual marker test, which has got a very good sensitivity and specificity, around 85 to 90% of detection rate with 5% false positivity rate. So the quadruple marker screening we can perform, because ideally the maternal screening should be offered to all the pregnant women irrespective of their age. But quadruple marker screening also, we have an added factor, that is AFP and UV3. And inhibin A. So inhibin A is also a marker wherein it can be elevated in cases of suspected preeclampsia. So that can also affect the aneuploidy screening. So quadruple marker screening can also be offered for this case from 15 to 17 weeks of gestation, which is the ideal time for quadruple marker.
Okay, but should we be doing that if we have done the dual marker and the PI screening? Is it really required?
I would not suggest.
We do that only if the patient for some reason missed the screening.
Missed the dual marker screening, yes. So ideally, the dual marker is
test only if the patient has missed the
dual marker
first trimester.
Yes.
Or if she is in the intermediate risk and the patient insists on further evaluation with an integrated test. Then you will be, because in the intermediate risk, there's always confusion whether to do NIPT or whether to do second trimester screening to do an integrated test. But of course, NIPT is good and but a little more expensive. The high risk.
We have an intermediate risk between the NIPT and quad test. What should we be choosing?
NIPT. But if
I would choose an NIPT. It's more specific for Downs, almost 99.9% accuracy.
Yes. So NIPT would be the choice.
If there's any doubt in your dual marker, if there's any doubt in the dual marker, we offer the patient an NIPT. Unless it's a very high risk when we say, oh, okay, do a direct amniocentesis
CVS,
or
amniocentesis, correct. Yeah.
Okay. So if the patient has an intermediate risk, okay, and how does it stand legally? If she is already, we have done a screening test which says she's at a high risk, then will you do NIPT is also actually a screening test. So would you do NIPT or would you recommend straight amniocentesis for the patient?
No, if it is a high risk, you would advise an invasive test. But if it's in the intermediate group only, you would advise NIPT. Unless the patient refuses to do an invasive test and opts for an integrated test and is agreeing to do an invasive test later at the 16 weeks with a lower complication rate. That's all.
Okay.
Because the complication rate of amniocentesis would be slightly lower than a CVS. In a general population, in people with good CVS trained people, CVS also complication rate and amniocentesis complication rate would be similar.
Okay, so if it is an intermediate risk, we can do NIPT, but if it's a high risk patient,
invasive
then it is better to do the amniocentesis or CVS, whichever is feasible and whatever is acceptable. Okay. So let's Preeti is very lucky. Her reports are all normal, and there is no high risk. She's in the low risk category for all the neural tube defects and the Downs, etc. So now, is there any change in the medicines, Dr. Thanawala?
Well, her medicines will continue depending on what sort of a sugar monitoring we are doing now.
Yes. So what kind of sugar monitoring would you advise Dr. Gada now to this girl?
So if the sugars were perfectly normal in between, then you can just screen her between 24 to 28 weeks with an OGTT. This is the time we expect because the insulin resistance goes up and they can precipitate. And if the sugars were abnormal, then you can start the SMBG home-based monitoring. Usually a fasting and 2 postprandials are enough. At times we do advise preprandials also. And very rarely if patients are on insulin, we may even want a 3 AM once in a while.
So Preeti is only on metformin, okay, and her testing at 8 weeks was that DIPSI was 145, and with that, now would you just tell her to do fasting and postprandials how many times a week?
So ideally per day, 1 fasting and 2 postprandials would be good enough initially. Then you see the trend. Yeah, the trend is that they are really uncontrolled. You start monitoring more frequently. Look at the values. The values are uncontrolled. You need to put her on insulin rather than waiting, and optimize the diet. And if the obstetrician allows, maybe an exercise is a definitely good option. Just a 10-minute walk post the major meals is a very good option if there are no other contraindications for that.
Okay. Does the first schedule of follow-up for antenatal visits change, Dr. Thanawala?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to clarify one point. What you are trying to get at is that what Jugal is saying is what we normally would follow, even if it's a patient only on diet control. We definitely, in our practice, would want to do a self-monitoring of blood sugar of the patient. And the advantages are they're very well under supervision. Plus, the woman herself realizes that मैंने आज ये खाया तो मेरा sugar बढ़ गया.
Yeah, it's learning by doing. There is no doubt about it. It's learning by
what
doing.
What Sangeeta is also saying is for the many patients who would not want to go on to self-monitoring, maybe you can, if her sugar was just 145 in the DIPSI test, I'd probably ask her after 10 days to repeat her fasting and a postprandial and take it from there. If it is absolutely normal, maybe I'll repeat it again after 15 days or so. But if it is high, then I'll say, no, now you better get on to self-monitoring or to, it depends on that. If the sugars remain normal fasting and PP, maybe take her on till and see how it is by doing a sugar at least every 15 days if the fasting and PP is normal. But if the sugar is not getting controlled, then it is better to put these patients on self-monitoring of blood sugar.
Okay, great. So will the follow-up for antenatal visits be just as any other routine patient or will it change?
No, it will change. Generally, we want to see.
What will you tell Preeti? When should she be coming back to you now?
I'll ask her to come back at 16 weeks anyway for a regular follow-up because I want to see her sugars also. Now, because of COVID, we are now not doing the 16-week following up.
No, let's forget COVID now. It's going to go away.
You can't forget COVID, Sangeeta. It's very much there.
It is there, but
And
let's
we sort of
not
got to
complicate
use the
PCOS
practice
and
now.
pregnancy with COVID for the moment.
No. What we do is the 18-week scan is very important here. The
Yes.
18 to 19-week sonography, we send her to, again to Chandar for a detailed anatomical scan. Of course, he's so good that he would have had a look at all the structures, even at the 11 to 12-week scan, because you can almost pick up 85% of abnormalities even in that scan. So very little is left to see, but yes, that 18 to 19-week scan is very important, and especially to have a look at the heart, because many diabetics, if their sugar has been high, they present with cardiac abnormalities. Besides the sacrum, the abnormalities in the CNS, etc., there's a whole list of abnormalities which can happen. But in generally, cardiac is something which is very important to be seen at in the 18 to 19-week scan.
Yeah. So, Dr. Lulla, Dr. Uday has convinced me, Preeti, that she should visit you at 18 weeks for a sonography. So now, will you go through that sonography? All that you expect and what all that you will see?
Yeah, so as Uday said, you can see all the lethal abnormalities today in the first trimester. And he was probably referring to the effects of diabetes on the lower spine, like a caudal regression syndrome, which is the most common abnormality seen in diabetics, can be seen in the first trimester. But otherwise, ventral wall defects, anencephaly, holoprosencephaly, most of these other major lethal defects will be picked up. So second trimester scan is very important. It's not that all the abnormalities will be seen on the first trimester. About 50 to 60% will be seen, 80 to 90% of lethal, I mean, almost 100% of lethal, but overall 50 to 60% of abnormalities. So you need a very good second trimester scan at 18 weeks, which will look at all these structures and, cleft lip, palate, everything, the cardiac abnormalities, which are common with diabetes. And once you have
You will do
ruled
Doppler
out,
as well.
you have confirmed, yes, you can do a uterine artery Doppler, but if your first trimester Doppler screening is good, then, and the patient is already on EcoSprin, you can do a second trimester screening also, and you will essentially look for abnormalities. And most importantly, I would just add that I'm very comfortable calling the patient back at 22 weeks to look for fetal heart, because sometimes you cannot pick up all cardiac abnormalities, especially things like TAPVC and other abnormalities cannot be completely ruled out at 18. So I must stress that in these high-risk group patients, please advise a 22 to 24-week scan to look for the fetal heart.
Okay.
Yeah, agree with that, and very important point what Chandar said, that in the first trimester, if your uterine artery pulsatile index is high, put them on aspirin, and that is 150 milligrams every night. That is the dose you put them.
She was already on aspirin, but we will continue that.
See, generally the patients, IVF people are on 75. So in case the uterine artery is abnormal, make it 150 every night. And it's important because you started before 16 weeks, because after that, it generally doesn't have too much of an effect.
So will you not make it 150 at 8 weeks itself when she comes to you?
Yeah. If you get a uterine artery which he reports as abnormal, then definitely we start aspirin as 150.
No, but even if it is normal, you will convert it to 150, right?
No, why should I then?
Because they are anyway in the high risk category. It is now recommended to give 150 only. 150.
Only if there is a high risk for preeclampsia.
Yes, but she is at high risk, right?
No, she is not at high. She's at high risk.
She's not confirmed at
PCO, but she's not a high risk at a preeclampsia. She's not a previous preeclamptic, and if her this biochemical screening is negative and the uterine artery is negative, then maybe I'll stop aspirin after the first 12 weeks when the IVF clinic tells me to stop aspirin.
Okay. So now, while in this same patient, she has done the scans at 20 weeks. She's done it at 24. Everything is fine and the baby is looking good. Now, Dr. Thanawala, what vaccinations will you recommend to her? Is there anything different from the PCOS point of view, or will you just go through the routine vaccinations, and what are they?
It's a routine vaccination, and what we generally do is we give a flu vaccination after 12 weeks of pregnancy, one shot of one of the flu vaccine, the currently available flu vaccine, we give it to them. And I generally would give either one dose of tetanus now and repeat a Boostrix at around 26 to 27 weeks. That is the combined
the Tdap.
Tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis.
Tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis.
27 weeks or so.
Okay. Now, what investigations will you advise at 28 weeks?
Look, if she's already a diabetic and if her sugars is being monitored, it is fine. But let's talk about a PCO who has not had normal sugars earlier. Then this is the time when we repeat a hemoglobin, we repeat a 75-gram glucose challenge test, the DIPSI test, and we repeat a urine sugar definitely in this patient if it has not been done before. Means if she's been a normal sugar patient before.
And if the sugars are abnormal?
If the sugars were abnormal, like in this patient, anyway, we are monitoring the sugars. So then we don't have to repeat a glucose challenge test.
Okay. So we, Dr. Gada, your views. Now this patient is 28 weeks. She's having a fasting of 140 and she's having to post glucose. She's at 2 hours, it is 160. So what step? Will you continue medication? Will you put her on insulin? She was earlier 145 after post glucose, but now she's 140 and 160 fasting and post glucose.
So the fasting is definitely very high. 140 is an abnormal fasting value, and she's already been on metformin, and with that the fasting is still high. Then I would actually put her on insulin. A simple insulatard or an NPH insulin or a Levemir would be good enough. The postprandial still is definitely 160, so I would just monitor her postprandial on her normal diet because this is on glucose. So on that, if that is also uncontrolled, then you might think of adding a prandial insulin as well.
Okay. Is there any role for the metformin dose to be increased, or would you just stop metformin and give only insulin then?
No, so if metformin is on, I would continue. I generally prefer to keep the dose between 1 to 1.5 grams because after that, the patients become a little more nauseous. They become a little more catabolic. We've seen patients losing weight. You don't want to do that in that pregnancy. So we usually generally tend to keep between 1 to 1.5 grams as much as patient tolerates. But if someone who's already been on 1 gram and you're not seeing very good results, I think insulin would be much better rather than waiting because you're just wasting too much time, keeping the sugars on the higher side.
Okay. So, Dr. Uday Thanawala, is there any role for inositols at this time? Because there is a lot of discussion and talk about inositols, and all kinds of studies and reports are coming. So,
No.
will you at any point in pregnancy have considered inositols?
No, I will not. I mean, anisetols are okay if the patient has been taking anicetrol, but to control sugar and all, no, I would definitely.
You would not have. Yes. Okay. Great.
No, only metformin or insulin.
Yes. Okay. And there is no role for any other anti-diabetic agent, correct?
Well, the glibenclamide, there are some studies which say it works, but in general now, I think especially the gynecologists are very comfortable with metformin, and even we know what dose to give and all. And I think the recent recommendation is metformin over glibenclamide.
Dr. Gada, your comments, please.
So glibenclamide, there have been 1 or 2 studies in African nations, but in general, we do not recommend because it also does cross the placenta and it can lead to some amount of hypoglycemia there as well. And we don't have long-term safety data on that, even in terms for the children. Even with metformin, I mean, even we are very pro as endocrinologists, metformin is something we all love, but metformin comes with its set of problems as well. So whatever studies have been done on patients who've been on metformin on their kids, they found at age 4 and age 9, their weights have been on the higher side. So what metabolic programming it is setting in, we don't know. And that is why most of the international guidelines recommend that you keep the patient on insulin rather than metformin. However, I think in India and I think most places, the practice is to continue the metformin and give the metformin.
Okay. So she's now about 34 weeks. Her sugars are a little erratic. Post-prandial is sometimes 160, 180 and 200. She's doing her best with the diet and exercise, and she's also taking the insulin. So Dr. Lulla does the sonography, and he says that the baby is a little on the large for gestational age baby. So let Dr. Thanawala, how will you take the patient ahead from here? She's 34 weeks and she has these erratic sugars, and she has a big baby.
If her sugars are very erratic, Sangeeta, I would like to admit her and give her a shot of steroids, because this girl, I may have to pull out the baby earlier in a premature state, and being a diabetic, the baby's lung maturity may not be anyway adequate till around 37, 38 weeks. So as a precaution, I would like to give this the girl steroids because the baby is may require to be pulled out earlier. As far as the baby becoming big is concerned, we have to, the only thing we can do is to tell her to control the sugar more appropriately and control the diet more appropriately, and keep a watch on this baby every 2 weeks to see how the growth is doing and how the Dopplers are doing. Though let me tell you, Dopplers will not give us a very good indication in a macrosomic baby if things are not even going right. So we have to, tell her to keep a proper kick count, etc., to see how the macrosomic baby is doing. On the other hand, if you had told me that the baby is lagging behind in the growth and there is some vascular element and the baby is going to IUGR, then Doppler is something which I'll definitely follow up very, very closely, because that is the only thing which will tell me when this baby is going to decompensate. So in a baby which is bigger than normal, we have to be careful, yes, because we have to control the sugars more properly. This baby may have complications like being big, having hydroamnios, going into premature labor. So we are worried about that and developing maybe preeclampsia. So it is important to think of steroids. Now,
So you will give her the steroid dose at 34 weeks, and you will try your best to do the diet.
give it only when I feel that something is going wrong, and she may not go up to 37, 38 weeks.
Okay.
Not regularly at 34 weeks. But if she, suppose
But
she's
she's
got,
34.
suppose
She's
you're telling me she's
34.
got IUGR, like you're telling me she's got hydroamnios. Like suppose she has hydroamnios, or she's got IUGR, or she's got a big baby and sugars are abnormal, then I know that this girl may require to be interfered earlier than 37 weeks. So I
Yeah.
should be prepared for it.
Yeah. So Preeti is 34. She has erratic sugars, and Dr. Lula has said that the baby seems to be little big. So with that, that is where we start. Where are we? How are you going to manage? You will give her the steroids, and what next?
Yeah. So I have to give her the steroids, monitor. Like, if she's not on self-monitoring, put her on self-monitoring, control the sugar. I'll ask Jugal Baba, kaise bhi karke sugar barabar control karo ke the baby doesn't get more fuel teratogenic fuel problems, more glucose going to the baby. So somehow we have to then wait and see that how the baby does, generally we try to take the baby till 37, 38 weeks anyway.
Okay, then at 37, 38 weeks, are you going to plan an induction? Are you going to plan an
No, induction, the role of induction is either the woman's sugars are absolutely not under control, or if the baby is having any distress. That is the thing for induction. Just for a big baby, we may or may not induce her. But if we have to interfere if the sugars are not coming under control for whatever reason, or if the baby is having any distress, which is shown either. And I'm telling you, none of the fetal monitoring methods are actually very accurate unless it's an IUGR baby. But we have to rely on what we have. So we have to rely on the NST, which we do twice a week. We do the Dopplers frequently over here, and we see the amniotic fluid volume, though it may be erroneous because in diabetes generally the amniotic fluid volume may be more. But then you have to go on to things like biophysical profile and all to monitor these babies. But in general, we would like to wait till 38 weeks or 39 weeks in this.
Dr. Lula, your comments on the sonography. How dependable are the reports for us to know whether we should go in earlier, induce the baby, or not induce the baby?
Okay, so as Uday said, there are two extremes. You can get a small baby or a large baby, and a small baby, there's no problem because you monitor, as with all placental insufficiency situations, you do a bi-weekly Doppler, and the moment you do a multi-vessel Doppler, and the moment you get any changes, you increase the frequency of Doppler and you deliver at an appropriate time. The problem is always for macrosomic and large babies, where he very, very correctly pointed out that Dopplers may be misleading because in a large baby, there is hyperperfusion, and Doppler, there is already increased flow state. So Doppler may not reflect. And that's why if you have sudden decompensation, you get a sudden stillbirth. It doesn't show sequential changes. So we rely on two things. One is, of course, the size. If the abdomen circumference of 35 is above 35 centimeters, we know, or if the weight is beyond 4,000 grams, we rely on the weight and Leica, as he said, but very, very importantly, I would like to mention is we rely on the bi-cheek diameter. The bi-cheek diameter to BPD ratio is a constant of 0.6 to 0.7. And this is very important to diagnose macrosomia because the fetus is already in insulin resistance, and even the maternal sugars may not reflect the fetal sugar status, because the fetus consumes more sugar and the maternal sugars may not reflect. So we measure the bi-cheek diameter related to the BPD. If it's heading beyond 0.6 to 0.7, then that's a sure shot marker for macrosomia, and then we need to monitor very, very closely and deliver as early as you think fit. But because Dopplers may not represent appropriately. So we do definitely do the Dopplers, the uterine and the umbilical artery and the ductus venosus. But we have seen Doppler changes within a week. You have a normal Doppler, and in a couple of days when we're monitoring high-risk pregnancies, we even see cardiac failure setting in within a week. So you have to look at the myocardium also, the myocardial thickness. And if the interventricular septum and the myocardial thickness is measuring more than 5 millimeter, we do have a lot of new techniques to monitor the cardiac function, but I don't think I'll get into that. We do a lot of cardiac heart monitoring, and but essentially Doppler is what is the basis, and you can do a ductus venosus Doppler.
So
but important.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so that you must look at because subcutaneous fat reflects insulin resistance the best. I think Jugal will verify this to me, but we look at subcutaneous fat, and insulin resistance directly correlates to subcutaneous fat, and it's a very sensitive marker. So 0.6 at 20 weeks and 0.7 at 40 weeks. The range is the same. So you can measure from 20 weeks to 40 weeks. You look at the bi-cheek, normalize it to the BPD. That's how we look at it.
Okay. So what is the when you say the bi-cheek diameter, at what stage will you say that yes, this is the best time? Is it useful to guide us as to intervene now?
It definitely highlights that you're dealing with a large baby and you need close monitoring. It does not tell you to intervene. It just tells you to monitor closely.
Okay.
Because these babies need close monitoring. As I said, Doppler will not completely reflect the true status. Of course, if you have Doppler changes, then you will act on those Doppler. Something like an absent diastolic flow, you won't wait, you will deliver immediately. Or even the CP ratio, if it's falling, then you will deliver immediately. So you will do the same protocol, bi-weekly Doppler. Once you have confirmed macrosomia, bi-weekly Doppler, and any changes would be viewed very critically, like a falling CP ratio, of course, absent end diastolic flow, and all these changes.
Sure. Dr. Gada, your comments?
This is, I think, completely a domain of the radiologist and the obstetrician. Yeah, we do look, at the weight of the fetus, because a lot of time IUGR could be because of, even metformin or the patient not gaining adequate weight. Uncontrolled sugars definitely leads to macrosomia. So getting the diet sorted, I feel, is very important, because the erratic diet is when, insulin is not working fine. Most of the times the diet schedule is completely haywire, and that is where I think this comes very important. You do a recall of the diet, what they've been eating day to day. Sometimes you tell them to jot down and make a food diary. So the better sugars you control, even though if there is a macrosomia, you can try and, help the patient better, so that the obstetrician can get up to the 37 weeks, which would be ideal.
I would really agree with this, because most of the mothers I see, they say, but I eat a chiku, that's normal. Banana, I think, nobody told me it's not bad. And one small dark chocolate doesn't matter, really, everybody told me. So this is really... and when we go into the list, we get surprised as to what they are consuming.
So most of the time, once you just put them on diet, they tend to lose a kg or half a kg. If you just put them on a normal GDM diet, and that is why all over throughout in the literature, you will see the GDMs do really well. Almost 80-85% are managed just with diet. It's because of the erratic eating patterns, and they tend to underreport. So we generally feel around 20% is underreported. They will not come out with so many things. And once you tell them to jot down, or you tell the husband or the mother-in-law or the mother who's come, they will tell you exactly what is happening, and you realize the calorie intake is way more than, little 300 or 350 calories, which is recommended over and above your normal diet. It's way more than that. So it's like pregnancy becomes a license to overfeed. That is what we say. And that needs to, once you just get that sorted, most of the patients start doing really well. Very few of them then require a metformin or an insulin, as we, think.
Okay, great. So now this Preeti has reached 38 weeks. Her sugar still remains slightly erratic. And Dr. Lula has already reported that she has a 3.8 kilo baby plus minus 400, 500 grams. So Dr. Thanawala, your plan of action. But otherwise the Dopplers are fine. And, the bi-cheek diameter says that she's got macrosomia. So your plan of action now.
At 38 weeks, generally what we obstetricians worry about is something like a sudden stillbirth occurring. Now and we don't know what the cause is. It's neither the sugars nor this. Maybe it's the intracardiac septum, which is bigger, or whatever the reason of or fluctuating sugars, whatever it is. We are worried about a stillbirth. So we generally advocate interfering and delivering this baby at 38 weeks. Now, this baby is already 3.8 kgs. She is 38 weeks. Sugars are more or less under control, but not very well under control. So maybe I will take a decision to deliver her. Though let me also tell you, the guidelines, generally the NICE guidelines, they say that no, you try and continue till 39 weeks now. Though. But I think in our country, 38 weeks is good enough. And definitely not above 40 weeks we wait for girls who are GDM. So at 38 weeks, it would depend upon what her pelvis is like, how much ready she is, what is the descent of the head, whether we induce or whether we do a planned cesarean.
Okay. I think it's already 7:25. So we will, I'm 100% sure that whatever decision Dr. Thanawala takes, whether induction or cesarean, Preeti is going to go home with a live baby. And she is extremely happy with the outcome of the pregnancy for the entire antenatal care that she received from this team. So can we now, Sonali, have the questions from the audience, please? Okay. So these are the questions, I think, which have come from the audience. Does taking metformin alter the GTT results? Dr. Gada?
Yes, metformin even has an after effect. So if you even don't take metformin for a day, the after effect does continue for at least 24 hours. So it is going to definitely affect your GTT results. Obviously, in the morning, you're doing it fasting, but the previous day, if you've taken it, it can definitely affect. So you should read it in sync with it.
We will not stop the metformin. We'll still do the GTT on metformin, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So if this patient had twins, will you advise fetal reduction, Dr. Thanawala?
Of course not.
Yes, of course not. Why should you reduce? The next question is dual marker a good test in the case of IVF twins?
Dual marker has got a very good sensitivity and specificity. So yes, it is validated, very well validated in case of twin gestation with IVF. So definitely the patient should go for the dual marker analysis.
I will just add that the false positive is double the false positive of a singleton pregnancy without without IVF. So it's 9%. So you need more invasive tests.
And also remember and counsel the patient that in case the dual marker does come positive, she'll have to undergo invasive testing in both the sacs. So, that is one thing which many of these patients who have conceived on IVF will not be willing for. Whenever you counsel the patient for a dual marker, it is very important to tell the patient what happens when you get a positive result or a high risk in a dual marker. Many of them are not willing for invasive testing, but if they're not willing for invasive testing, don't even do the dual marker and increase the stress levels.
And I would just like to add the reason behind that is that 10 to 15% of twins, even dichorionic, will be monozygotic. That is very, very important. So they will have the same genetic material, although it is dizygotic. So even if one is showing a slightly higher nuchal translucency or a higher risk, you need to test both, as Uday said.
Okay. So can one directly go for NIPT?
In a twin
twins is not Not yet recommended NIPT in twins.
You can do it, but it's not 100% test, and the false positives are higher. The accuracy is high. The fetal fraction, you will not know from which fetus, because the normal fetus will overshadow the abnormal fetus, so the fetal fraction will be. But you can do it. Potentially, you can do it if the patient insists. We
Dr.
do
Birla, would you like to
NIPT
add
for kids.
there?
The NIPT primarily relies on the circulating fetal DNA in the maternal circulation. So, as Dr. Chandralula rightly said, that we will not be sure as to from which fetus this DNA is being circulating in the maternal blood. So, the sensitivity of the test will be low. However, if we are getting a positive screen on NIPT, definitely we know that with either of the fetus, we need to go for some invasive testing then.
Okay, but cannot replace the dual marker.
No, it is a better test than dual marker, but the false positives are, I mean, we cannot make out, like she said. And again, the fetal fraction, if the lady is obese, the fetal fraction can be low. There are a lot of problems, but it's got a lower accuracy. It's about 80 to 90%, which is better than dual marker. Dual marker will be slightly lower because the false positive will be higher.
Okay. So the next question is aspirin prescribed for every pregnant PCOS patient and what dose?
Prescribed for every PCOS pregnancy.
Sorry, come again.
IVF. Aspirin is not prescribed for every PCOS patient. This was an IVF case. That's why she was on aspirin. Otherwise, we don't prescribe to normal girls everyone getting pregnant. We don't give aspirin.
Yes, correct.
Also, Dr. Sangeeta, regarding this aspirin in the PCOS cases, we primarily do it for the preeclampsia. Apart from the first trimester dual markers for preeclampsia screening, we have this SFLT PLGF ratio, the test which can also be performed from 14 weeks to like 38 weeks of gestation to rule out the risk of preeclampsia in the next 4 weeks of gestation. So that test can also be performed regularly whenever we're suspecting a high-risk case for preeclampsia, if the patient is not already on aspirin.
Okay, but if she's already taking aspirin, then what happens? You can't do the test.
No. This test, what she's saying, is an excellent test, and I generally do it in women who develop preeclampsia, and suddenly the BP is very high, especially after 27, 28 weeks, because it gives you some idea how soon this patient may deteriorate and go into a eclamptic thing or an IUD or any of the complications, or she will carry on for another week or 15 days, depending on the value the ratio which you get. So there are 3 divisions. And if it is in the low risk and all, we just leave the patient alone for another 2 weeks and repeat that. But these are all in pre-eclamptic patients. Patients who have already developed blood pressure. This test is excellent, and it tells you how the patient is going to behave in the near future.
The next coming week, yes. If it is less than 38, then we can rule out preeclampsia for at least like 4 weeks, next 4 weeks. And if the value is around 38 to 85, the ratio is around 38 to 85, then she might develop preeclampsia post 1 week. And if it is more than 85, then she can develop in the coming week of gestation.
Okay. So there is a question for Dr. Uday Thanawala. Because this patient is a IVF pregnancy, is it not better to just directly go for LSCS?
Yes, I agree. It is better to go for better to go for an LSCS because the baby weight is 3.8 anyway. So we don't want to look at a very prolonged and labor, especially if she's not ready for labor at 38 weeks. Which generally, if the cervix is not effaced, station is not come down, better to do an elective LSCS with things ready, keeping her like Vilas Gara to control the sugar, like take the insulin doses regularly and have a good outcome. Totally agree that we can do an elective LSCS.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sonali, are there any more questions? Dr. Asta, are there any more questions from the audience?
I think these are the ones. Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing in the chat box, right?
One important thing which we generally do not pay much attention is to after the delivery to tell this woman that, look, she is at a higher risk. Even if her sugars come back to normal, she is at a higher risk of becoming a diabetic. So
Yeah.
do the cigarette 6 weeks, 6 months, then once every year, and that will be a OGTT which we'll be doing now. So very important to follow up these patients. So
Yes.
in that workshop which we are having on 9th,
Yes, exactly.
there's a full-
So you're going to do the postpartum care and the contraception, etc., after the delivery. So
Yes.
today we are just going to deliver the patient and enjoy the delivery process which has happened. The good news, enjoy the sweets and the chocolates, and we will leave the postpartum care for 9th of January, 4 p.m. Correct?
Yeah, I think so. Whatever it is,
Yeah.
we'll send the brochure out. But we've aptly named it Badhai Ho. So the PCOS patient has become pregnant after great difficulty. So we do Badhai Ho, but we carry on and make sure that this woman, the PCOS is a continuum thing. It doesn't end with delivery. She in
Yes.
her perimenopausal age, menopausal age, she's always at risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disorders. So the PCO patient, you have to just keep a watch on them always.
Great. So thank you. First and foremost, I would like to thank Metropolis for having made this program, for bringing this program to you. And I would like to thank all my panelists for sparing their valuable time and being here today. Thank you very much, Dr. Thanawala, Dr. Lula, Dr. Gada, and Dr. Birla. It was wonderful having you on the panel, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you
And
very
with
much.
this, maybe
Thank you.
we wish all our audience a very happy Christmas in advance and a happy New Year, which is corona free.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
Jordan. Thanks, Chandra. Thanks,
Thank
Varsha.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.